Hello everybody, welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. We've got a packed show for you this week. The Scotland squad was announced earlier today, so we've got that to go through. We've got lots of news to catch up on. As we get closer to the Six Nations, it always starts to ramp up with the news cycle. Joining me to wade through all of that, we have Johnny McGinty. Good evening, Johnny.
Good evening, how are we doing?
We've got Craig Manson. Good evening, Craig.
Good evening, all. How are we doing?
And we also have John Anderson. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Cammy, and good evening, everyone that's listening.
I was just thinking, John, I was looking at the opening credits there that we do on the live podcast, and there was a photo of me, you, and Ian.
Yes.
And that was simpler times. That was 2 years ago.
I know.
That trip to Sale.
Round about now, actually, wasn't it? It was 2 years ago. It was just...
To the most frightening shopping centre I've ever been to in my life.
Oh, well, I mean, maybe in future times, hopefully with maybe some restrictions starting to ease up, perhaps there will be Sail Away Part 2, which we might end up somewhere else. Who knows?
Who knows? We have got our live podcast coming up on the 19th of March at the Biscuit Factory in Leith. If you go to the blog, scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, and you find the latest podcast post, we'll put a link on there. So tickets are available. It's a watch party for the last weekend of the Six Nations. We'll be there live podcasting. There's going to be live music. We understand there will be food there from Proper Pioneer, which is WP Nell's catering company. So that'll be lots of fun. We're looking forward to that. We'll start with the news, shall we? Do you want to talk about, George? Should we talk about we didn't cover the retirement last week, did we, Craig? I think it was announced on Thursday. George Taylor having to retire early from Edinburgh.
No, we didn't talk about him at all, unfortunately. But yeah, because I think it's always very, very difficult when players have to retire early, especially players who seem to have a good career ahead of them. And so it's a lot of us are fairly disappointed and sad to see him retiring early. He was going to become a fairly strong. He was a strong Edinburgh player, and all power to him. And I hope his future goes well. Hope he's got a future, and I hope he's still involved in rugby somehow.
Yeah, it's worrying, I suppose, Johnny, as well. It's another player down with a head, unable to come back after a head injury, though.
Yeah, I'll be very surprised if he's the last one. To be perfectly honest, there was the other one, obviously, slightly less auspicious circumstances this weekend with that guy who was a prop for Saracens just settling for £3 million because they went on a team bonding trip and Richard Barrington hit him in the head with a fire extinguisher. And so now he's been forced to retire as well. I think more that are more game related are probably incoming, I would think.
Yeah. Other bits of news, John, a bit of Glasgow news. Kenny Murray has left as Glasgow's defence coach.
Yes.
Some people say he left a long time ago.
Some would say he left with immediate effect after the weekend.
So he's off to be the in charge of interim rugby, I think, or what is it? Transitional rugby.
Player transition.
Player
so
transition.
it's also, so if you read the news release, it seems like Kenny Murray he seems to have been congratulated for his role with Glasgow by being given about 40 different people's jobs. So he's now under 20s head coach, because apparently under the elite development program that Jim Mallender has overseen, the review, they've decided that having the player transition guy who's in charge of all that also be the head coach of the 20s. So to aid that transition through, he was going to be working with, there was a newly appointed head of the 18s and 19s. So yeah, he's got that. He's also got remit for the Exiles program. So scouting players abroad, broadening the Scottish player pool. That's under his remit as well. No mention of defence, though, which, I mean, for those of us that watched the weekend, probably not a bad thing.
Pete Murchie's stepping up, though, Johnny. We
Yes.
understand. There's no word yet on What was Pete Murchie doing beforehand? Was he just skills?
I think he was just skills, yeah, if I remember rightly.
Did he
He's
come in after
kind of
Kelly
dabbled in
Brown?
bits and pieces.
Came
Yeah,
in and
because
replaced
he
Kelly
was
Brown.
at Ayrshire Bulls. Pete Murchie, was he not?
Yeah.
And then Kelly Brown went back down south and he stepped in. I'm still never been entirely sure what a skills coach does, but whatever it is, that's what he was doing.
It's
And
like
then
in
he jumped to
Football
the first.
Manager like in Football Manager when you've got your coaches and you've got your specialist coaches and you've got your generic coaches that you need to fill out the gaps to make sure everybody's getting enough coaching. That's a skills coach.
I just assumed it was like we want to give this person a job, so we've made one up.
Even more cynical from Cam.
We want to bring Gregor Townsend wanted to bring Mike Blair onto the Scotland setup. He wasn't experienced enough to have a big job, so you're a skills coach.
For a while, Balshaw he was either England skill coach or he was a Premiership skill coach, and he doesn't have that many skills. Line out jumping was always his skill, and he doesn't really have any others.
You mean in Borthwick? Not.
Oh, Borthwick. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, because I was like, I mean, Balshaw was not the worst player in the world. Borthwick, I would agree with.
I get them mixed up, but yeah, no, it was Borthwick, I think.
I mean, one's a fleet-foot fullback, the other's a very, very crooked-nosed second row. Easy to mistake. I know. In your line of work, Johnny, I know those are the same thing. So,
yeah,
I try to do them 50-50.
The other bit of news, which is this is quite exciting. I think we've got a Scottish referee who's going to be refereeing Six Nations game. I mean, it's Mike Adamson, Craig, but it's been how long?
I'm standing in solidarity with Mike Adamson. I'm going to stand up and say Mike Adamson. I think it's a raw deal. I agree with you.
I'm
having nothing said against him because I'm fed up of everyone, all the English, all the Welsh, all the Irish moaning like. I almost thought it was Patreon time. Moaning about him, I'm absolutely standing by him and say, him and I'm disappointed that we're not seeing Holly Davidson as I know she's going to be involved in TMOs and assistant referees, etc. But I think it's even. Oh goodness, I've forgotten the girl's name, and I apologise for that. But the English ref, Sarah Cox, we've not even got her involved, and I think it's about time we had that. So,
they're doing the under 20. I think pretty much there's a really heavy female presence in the under 20. So Holly Davidson's going to be refereeing a few games, and so is Sarah Cox. But I agree with you. I think the time is now we've got female referees in the RC and the Premiership. It's time just to accept that that's going to be part and parcel of the Six Nations now as well.
And to be perfectly honest, if we're going to level the accusations that a lot of people say about Mike Adams, with Holly Davidson, that's for sure.
Yeah,
very good ref.
I think Mike Adamson's a very decent referee, to be honest. I know, everyone kind of. I think you're in the bubble of the Pro 14 URC or whatever it has been in the past when Mike Adamson gets a raw deal. He gets a raw deal, like you say, Craig, mainly from the other nations. I actually think he communicates fairly well. I think his main problem is that as soon as someone pointed out that he looked like Carl Pilkington, I just couldn't shift that image from my mind.
I think we've struck quite lucky with our refs for the Six Nations, to be honest.
Who have we got? We haven't got any French referees, have we, this time round?
No French.
Ben O'Keefe, Nick Berry, Carl Dixon, which I'm a bit sketchy about, Luke Pearce.
Wayne Barnes.
Oh, Wayne Barnes for the Ireland game at the end, yeah.
Because it's always Wayne Barnes against Ireland. For reasons unbeknownst.
He knows our players' names now, and that's the key thing.
Yeah. Well, after this announcement, he might not know after.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think most of the coaching staff knew some of the players' names for this announcement.
Yeah. It's O'Keefe that gives me the GBs. Like I feel like we never really. He always has this thing with the stronger side, and that's usually the more physically dominant in the scrum. And we've got him for England, and I fear we may suffer badly there.
Having said that, O'Keefe and Berry are both New Zealand, right?
Barry's Australia, but O'Keefe's New Zealand.
Yeah. But I think especially O'Keefe, I think the way he referees the breakdown often suits us.
I think the breakdown will suit us. My concern would be that we get penalised an inch of life in the scrum and we just get marched back.
Yeah, but that's not the referee's fault, is it? If our scrum's rubbish.
Well, if we're looking at the Glasgow,
Excuse me,
whoa!
We agreed. Penalties.
We agreed. Patreon only. None of your stuff, Manson. No.
He started it, sir.
Yeah, exactly, Cammy. Tell him off. He's at it.
Behave, a lot of you.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Shocking. It's a blooming.
Yeah. Last bit before we got the main squad, the 7th squad was announced as well. A couple of nice surprises in there. Well, not surprises, I suppose, but a couple of Super 6. I got Kalim Barreto, Harvey Elms as well, and Jacob Henry, Grant Hughes, Lee Jones is back. But it's good, Craig, I think, to see kind of the form of the players that have been in really good form in the Super 6 getting that reward.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of new caps there. Obviously, Kalim was involved last year, but only got a couple of caps. So he's a great sevens player. He comes across as a great sevens player and a great open rugby player. So, but yeah, I think because Pete Horn, George Horn. Okay, I'm only talking about the guys that I know from our club, but. They all got a great amount out of the sevens, and it can be corresponded, especially for example, I was listening to Eddie Jones today talking about the England players that have had a bit of international work and they've gone back to their clubs and they've been looking far stronger. And I think that's the same thing with the sevens. A lot of players go away and they make themselves in the seven circuit and then they come back to their clubs and then all of a sudden they've got a Scotland shirt on their back, an international 15s jersey.
Yeah. Speaking of which, and then you look at the squad announcement and we'll go straight into it. Kyle Rowe, who's come from, he's former Scottish Sevens international, has gone, had to go away and find playing time elsewhere, has done very well for himself, and now finds himself with a cap. And it's thank you for C Kayak 59 Degrees North on YouTube said, "Can I congratulate Cammy on getting Tuni Tumbola mentioned on BBC Radio Scotland? I can tell you were desperate to say it." I didn't predict this, though. I thought we'd have one Who Dat selection. I should have known better of Gregor Townsend. We've got, so in terms of the unknowns, there's Ben White, scrum half for London Irish. We've got Kyle Rowe, winger for London Irish. And then in the back row, there is, where's his name? Andy Christie, who plays for Saracens. Johnny, nobody saw that. I don't think anybody would have predicted those, unless you're somebody that just sits all day and consumes nothing but wall-to-wall rugby, could have predicted any of those three names appearing today.
No. I don't think even if you are a person who consumes rugby non-stop, that you would have predicted that. Kyle Rowe has been kind of picking up a bit of stock over the last 6 weeks or so. He was probably the least surprising of the three of them, but the other two... Nah, I don't know how you would have ever guessed that.
I mean, it's so far left of left field, isn't it? It's like, basically Alaska.
Andy Christie doesn't even have a Wikipedia page for me to fiddle with.
He does have some lovely videos on Twitter of him FaceTime with his family. If you haven't seen them, they're on the Scotland Twitter now as well. It's great. It's so nice.
He's just basically done a little thread of him telling his family one at a time that he's in the Scotland squad, and it's obviously I think the first one was like his gran. And
the grandparents that had never used FaceTime before, they were my favourite.
It's always a classic of the genre. But having said that, I think Mark McCall has said today, who's obviously Saracens director of rugby, has spoken really highly of him. So it sounds like, although I think he's come through the Scottish, not the systems, he's come through the Exile program. I think he has played for the under 16s.
I think it was 16s and 17s.
Yeah. Kyle Rowe has beaten 3.9 defenders per game in the Premier Rugby this season. Does anybody know the back? Has anyone seen the stat for this? The only other back in the Premiership to hit more than that in terms of the average number of defenders beaten per game?
Duhan.
It was Duhan with 4.9.
Yes.
So we've got the top two in terms of the top two kind of wingers in terms of defenders beaten, which is nothing. Ben White is I mean, Craig, he played against Edinburgh this weekend.
Yeah,
we know that.
Yeah.
Did you pay your
Go,
$5
Craig.
to see it though?
I didn't. I pay enough money to Edinburgh Rugby, as far as I'm concerned, and I think I think it's as a season ticket holder, I'm going to give the whole. Do you know who I am? I think they should. Season ticket holders should automatically have got a live stream for that, but that's a different story altogether. I think, and I guess it's. I was probably going to talk about this in Hands in the Ruck, and I probably will go over it because I'm really quite raging about it. To be perfectly honest, we've invested a lot of money in scrum halves, and the SRU have invested a lot of money in scrum halves, and we have have had three incredibly good scrum halves at Glasgow, and whether it's Danny Wilson, whether it's Glasgow, whether it's the SRU, whoever it is, has ruined or virtually ruined two of them with not giving them game time, because Dobie doesn't get game time, George Horn gets no game time. It's very much all Ali Price at this moment in time.
Dobie's 18 though. I mean, to say he's been ruined by not
I'm
getting
saying,
game time
I'm
is a
saying,
bit presumptuous.
The point's right about George Horn, though. Craig's right about George Horn.
Had no form this season. That's fair. Yeah, he doesn't suit Danny
because
Wilson.
He's getting no game time.
Yeah, of course he isn't. He doesn't suit Danny Wilson. He should have left. You're absolutely right. I don't disagree with that in the slightest. But to bring Jamie Dobie into it at age 18, who has been getting game time.
But Jamie Dobie was in the Scotland squad last year, and he's not in it now.
But Ben Vellicott's on the scene now. He's a more experienced, more talented player who's obviously doing well at Edinburgh. People fall out of squads. He's 18. You can't.
This is the exact conversation we had in autumn when everyone said, "Why is Jamie Dobie in the squad and not Ben Vellicott?"
Yeah, exactly. You can't possibly say that Vellicott.
I accepted that last week. I'm not saying ruin's probably the wrong word for Jamie Dobie. The problem you have is that we have these fantastic. We've had to go out and buy a inner scrum half. Now, okay, fair enough. He's a Scots qualified scrum half, and he's got and he's been on the horizon for some time for Scotland as Ben Vellicott. He came up. He didn't play very many games, so I didn't expect him to be in the Autumn Nations. I expected him to be somewhere around it for the Six Nations because of the way he's been playing this season. But he's been given a huge amount of game time. Now, okay, Charlie Shield isn't getting a huge amount of game time, and he's probably in the same bracket as Jamie Dobie, as in he's quite young, so he's needing experience. But you would expect him to get that experience. And I don't, they've taken George Horn. As far as I'm concerned with George Horn could have been a first team, or he was a first team starter for a long, long time, and he was developing very, very well. And all of a sudden, he's done something that he's not getting the game time. He's getting 5 minutes at the end of the game. He's been on the bench for Scotland, and there's been a couple of games he's not even got on the park with Scotland. And it's as far as, and then you've got Edinburgh, who have been scratching around for a decent scrum half for a long time, and Glasgow are mine, and okay, fair enough. George wanted to stay at Glasgow, but he's now at a point where he's not getting in the Scotland squad, and he was a prodigious talent. And I just feel it's a waste. I'm not saying it's just pointing the finger at Glasgow, pointing the finger at whoever. I just think it's a waste. The SRU could have done something better than this.
It's not necessarily something George has done though. He's behind a test lion now. What do you want us to set a test lion on the bench and let George Horn play?
But having said that,
yes.
I think this is one of the problem, not the problems, but it's one of kind of the byproducts of the URC now, is that in previous seasons with the Pro 14 as it was, the Six Nations is the time where the George Horns, the Adam Hastings got game time, and that was their time to play. They knew that there would be windows within the season, the autumn tests, Six Nations. you're going to be first choice and you're going to get time to develop. The problem now is every game has to be won with the URC because it's much more competitive than it ever was. The games are played outside the international window, so players like George Horn don't get a chance. I think the problem for someone like George Horn is then the choices, like you said, Craig, is the SRU should have done something sooner to distribute the scrum half log jam across the two pro teams. I think probably a big reason that didn't happen was Richard Cockrell. Because I don't think George Horn. I think we can all agree George Horn wouldn't have benefited from going to Edinburgh under Richard Cockrell. Having said that, I agree with you. Why there's enough scrum halves in Scotland that they're just not being used. But as John said, the option probably now is for George Horn that he needs to think about going elsewhere to
I
get
think
game time.
as soon as Price signed his contract, I think Horn's agent will be putting him elsewhere. I think Glasgow, you're probably right. There has been a little bit of hoarding in that sense, Craig, and I think it's partially Glasgow, partially the players.
Yeah, the players have thought out. Yeah, absolutely.
They do have a say, of course they do, and I think Cammie's absolutely right. Horn would not have went to Edinburgh under Cockrell because that would have been, career suicide. But I think everyone in their dog expected Price to leave Glasgow. And the fact that the SRU and Glasgow have managed to retain him, that has put Horn in the position now where he probably does have to move on to further his career if he's ambitious and wants to go and play first team rugby and get into the Scotland squad. He probably does have to move on now. Dobby is, for me, clearly the second choice within the Danny Wilson game plan, whether I agree with that or not, but Johnny's right. We can't possibly think that just because Horn's got some previous in the bank but doesn't suit the game plan, but we should still give him a game over a test line because it's Horn. It's George, a lot of things have come together.
But George does, I agree with you. I think George Horn signed his contract extension thinking that Ali Price was gone.
Yeah. Oh, he did. 100%.
He thought,
but that's the gamble you take in professional sport, and
very much so.
Price is, 2 years ago, Price had some form, but you wouldn't have said he was a starting test line. He was, probably one of Scotland's best. There was people before the Lions were saying there's no way Ali Price makes it into the squad because he's bang average, he's this, he's that. So that
was me.
Yeah, there you go. And
a delicious pint it was too. Thank
you. So there's plenty of debate there, and Horn probably did sign his contract with a view that, okay, yeah, Price is probably off, or I think I can usurp him. But Price has kicked on, and Horn hasn't. I think these guys see him every day.
Within this, I think there's two things going on with this squad that's really interesting, and it's a classic Gregor Townsend play. One is the sticking two fingers up at Eddie Jones and pulling in English players before they're capped, because Ben White played for England against the Barbarians. He's not in a non-cap international, and all of a sudden he's in the Scotland cap. So there's a little bit of that going on. I think the other things is that it's a page absolutely out of Gregor Townsend's playbook, and he does it every Six Nations and every autumn. It's the first squad that comes out, he drops a couple of big names, and you put George Horn, you put Adam Hastings, you put Ollie Kebble in there, and he will have said to them, here's your work-ons. Now, there's no way those players aren't playing at some point over the Six Nations. We're not going to get through a tournament without them appearing, but it's a way to send them a message to say, look, we've got depth. I can afford for you not to be in camp, to give you some work-ons to go away and do, with the threat that you've got to now work hard to come back in. At the same time, the benefit is he gets to pull in some new lads, give them experience of the camp, get to see how well they gel, get them used to the play, so that if there is a run of injuries and all our scrum halves kind of fall down with an injury, then Ben White might be an option. Do you know what I mean? I think those two things are going on. I think you can afford to drop Horn, Hastings and Kebble from the squad, because Kebble will come on to in a minute, maybe not Kebble, but you can afford to drop Horn and Hastings from this squad and send a message to them about their form and maybe some work-ons, and not weaken the squad overall.
I completely agree, Cammy. The one I would heavily disagree with his Hastings form has been fantastic down south.
It has, but and I don't want to have this argument again, but Blair Kingholm's form for Edinburgh has been fantastic in Scotland, and I think there's the rub, because Ross Thompson's form for Glasgow has been pretty decent as well.
Yeah,
I think the thing is that if he knows that Hastings isn't playing in the first get the Calcutta Cup, and he's going to stick Kinghorn on the bench.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to say to Adam Hastings, look, I know your form's going brilliant down south. I know your attack's great. I want you to work on these things in defence. You need to really fight your way to get back in. It's a rocket up his bum, and it works for some players. It doesn't work for others. I think that's what's happening.
I would definitely go back to what we talked about last week, though, as well. In that, if you look at Hastings, Finn Russell, and Ross Thompson, they will all give you the same game. They're all a 10 in the same mould. I'm not saying that they're all exactly the same, but they're all in the same mould, whereas Blair Kinghorn isn't. And whether you like it or you don't, whether you think he's this or that or the other, he's there now, and he is going to give Tooney an absolute. Well, first of all, he's going to cover three positions, but also he's going to give him an ability to either start him or bring him off the bench, which is probably going to be the thing. And he's going to change the game completely in a different way. He still has the crossfield kicks. I'm not saying they're perfect. He still has a similar. He can still play a game plan like Finn Russell, but he also has that, and we've talked about it before, that ability to break the line. And he's a more physical specimen, I would say, than Finn is. So I think it's an interesting choice, and I'm really pleased for Blair Kinghorn. But it's interesting to hear. I've got to say, Hastings is. I've scratched my head about Hastings as well, because I think, just as John said, Hastings' form for Gloucester is absolutely on point at the moment. You know.
How much of this do you think is actually a trauma response to that game down in Twickenham? When not the one we drew, the one where we got absolutely pummeled and we had like players playing in the wing and stuff. Do you think Townsend is actually traumatised by that and is now picking players that can cover 100 positions?
That was Vern, though. That was
that Vern?
Cotter. It was Vern. It was Vern Cotter. Because that was a game where I gave everybody 0 out of 10, apart from Ali Price. Just on the bit, and Gordy Reid, because Gordy Reid scored a try, he got 5 out of 10. Ali Price ended up on the wing, so he got 5 out of 10 for playing out of position. Everybody else got 0. I think Stuart Hogg might have got 5 out of 10 for
getting injured and going off.
I can't remember. Anyway, that was Vern Cotter. I don't think it's that. I just think it's, rugby's an attritional game, and I don't know. I think the more depth you can have on the pitch and on the bench, the better. And ultimately, Hastings covers 2 positions. Kinghorn, as Craig said, Kinghorn covers 3. They're both in great form, and so he can afford to drop one of them from the squad altogether and send a message if that's what he's decided to do. Maybe if he didn't feel he needed to give somebody the work-ons, maybe he would have been in the squad as well, and it wouldn't matter because there's no limit on the size of a squad for the Six Nations. I don't think.
Confusing thing, isn't it? It's like there isn't like it's not like a World Cup squad where there's a cap. So I always find it quite strange that we do limit ourselves in that way, but fair enough.
The other thing that Kinghorn brings that you can't really coach anybody else to do is that he's 6'3" and 115 kilos,
or 6'5",
and so is Duhan. So if we are finding ourselves in a position where we're getting the ball kicked down our throats and Ali Price and Finn Russell have got to start kicking it back, I don't care how talented a fullback or how talented a winger you are. If 2 boys that size are jumping in your face on every single high ball, it's hard work, and they'll start to think twice about just hammering it back to us.
And let's be realistic. I mean, it's not, that having players of that physical size in the backs isn't something we've always had, Craig.
It hasn't been. But then you have people like Darcy who's 5 foot nothing or whatever he is, and he's got the horsepower of Duhan. He's a strong boy in contact. So it's an odd one. But is it the way the game is going that we could, we talked about this. It must be, or it's been talked about for a couple of years now that the boys in the backs now are getting bigger and bigger. You've got to look at Nandolo and people like that are playing for Leicester. That you think. You actually don't think he's running that fast, but actually when you come to tackle him, he's running plenty fast for you, So it's just, Fafita's the same, who's come to Glasgow, he's a big lad. And I think that seems to be the way it's going. And Duhan was, for Scotland, was the first kind of guy that was bringing that sort of physicality and that size. Although Tim Visser, I suppose, was quite tall as well.
Yeah. I don't think, it's not I don't think it's necessarily that there's no, like I said, Darcy, you'd have no concerns about Darcy's physicality. I suppose it's just a different dimension. And I don't think the game's necessarily going that way because it went that way in the past and it came back the other way eventually because everyone realised just making everybody bigger didn't necessarily mean that it made everybody better.
You mean Frank Cadden's game plan was flawed? What is this blasphemy, Cam?
We'll just like bulk up Sean Lamont until he can't move anymore.
This is the thing though about Craig, about
carry on,
and Duhan is that they can shift.
Yeah.
Like we're not talking about a big slow unit. Like those are quick boys, and and it's just like, and I get that like making someone bigger isn't always the answer, and Darcy obviously could pull out some incredible stuff, but if you are in a game where you're having to kick it down somebody's throat, Darcy doesn't cast a shadow like Blair Kinghorn or Duhan does if they're jumping up for the same ball as you.
No. And actually, I think it gives space to select Darcy because if you choose Darcy on the wing, then you have to put him up in the defensive line and have somebody else falling back. So it's, you have to look at the bigger picture if you're selecting Darcy on the wing. Yeah, you'll get the physicality, but it's one less player who's going to be able to compete for a hat. I'm not saying he can't jump, but it's just if he's up against a big lad, he's always going to struggle to get the air and compete. So you end up sacrificing one of your back three who could be in the backfield and having to put them up and drop somebody else back, which for Scotland, it's always been Finn.
Russell,
You've had Finn, Hogg and Duhan in the back. But
it'll be an interesting one as well with 50. This will be our first. This will be our first Six Nations of 50-22. Yeah. So which has been working. In my opinion, it's been working quite well. There's a lot more. If you do ship it wide, and you're getting a little bit more out of the tries are up. If you know what I mean.
I think essentially that's how we beat England. Although the 50-22 rule wasn't in, it was just kick it. We just kept putting it into touch in the corner and putting them under pressure on their own line.
Yeah.
Let them exit. It's almost been a Scotland game plan for a couple of years now that we do those kicks in behind and we kind of try to find grass and get them playing from their own territory. And Russell and Hogg in particular have both been, I think we said it at the time, they're both very, very good at that type of kick. So it has suited Scotland. So it'll be interesting to see if it is something that really benefits us, and if we end up beating Ireland with it, I'm sure it'll get changed.
Yeah. The centres, we haven't talked about the centres. Cameron Redpath is back. Now, we talked about flyer halves. Interestingly, he played 10 for Bath at the weekend.
Yeah.
So there is an element of, is that the backup 10? And again, you can afford to drop Hastings because you've potentially got someone. I mean, it's an absolute break crash in case of emergency situation, but he's done it in European rugby. He might be a better option than Stuart Hogg. If it comes to it.
He absolutely is, yes. But let's not.
I'm not talking about starting him, but I suppose it's more. It comes back to, I suppose, John, the flexibility you've got. Sione Tuipulotu, we know can play 12 and 13. I think Rory Hutchison was touted as a possible, could step in at 10 if needed be. Similar with Cameron Redpath. I think Cameron Redpath has played 12 and 13 as well.
Yep.
Harris can play 12, 13 and wing. So again, it's flexibility. And Mark Bennett back in as well, which,
Yeah, Mark Bennett can cover the wing as well, with which he has done in the past. So, yeah, I I think it might have been yourself actually that said, or Rory that said it's the squad of the versatility player, particularly in the backs, and I think that's fair. Like most, if not all, aside from your scrum halves, I think everyone can play a secondary position. At least one, and yeah, with your centres, you're probably saying you can kind of mix and match. But my concern with this is right. So you think about the great players over the years, right, and think about even from a Scotland perspective, think about players who, let's say, in the backs make the jersey their own, and it's almost they're synonymous with the number that they're wearing. They don't have necessarily, they don't move about all that much. Yes, it's an in case of emergency thing. This versatility thing is cool, and I think it might be the way that we go, but I think there's an argument to be said. 10, 12, 13 know who's playing those positions and only those positions, and let's not necessarily worry so much about flexibility. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Townsend played 10 and 12 and 13, I think, for Scotland.
Yeah, but he's definitely remembered as a 10.
Yeah. How do you explain Bowden Barrett then?
Bowden Barrett is, and I don't explain Bowden Barrett, he is from another planet. He is an anomaly of epic I'm not saying that players shouldn't be able to play multiple positions. I just think from our perspective, I think there is key positions that we could nail down people and they could make the position their own, and we don't need to worry so much about this flexibility. Have it on the bench, yeah. So this will shock Craig, but have Blair Kinghorn, perfect, yeah. Have him there. Throw him in at 13 as well. Let's see if he can run there. Like, he could be the ultimate utility back. He could play everywhere bar 9. That would be perfect. But I just think having players
there is something. Well, there is something, and a stop clock is right twice a day, isn't it, Craig? Eddie Jones says that. I do think that to a certain extent, positions are becoming more irrelevant in rugby because it's about the system that the team wants to play and finding players with the capability and the skills and the intelligence to do what the coaches are asking of them and to adapt accordingly to what's in front of them. So you don't need centres or fly halves or scrum halves. I mean, some of those will be special positions, but generally what you need is players that will come in and be clever enough to do what the coach is asking them to do and be able to adapt.
Yeah, my only issue is that at 10, if you look at all the best 10s in the world, they control the game. They know they know the game plan, whether Finn Russell likes the game plan or doesn't like the game plan. He knows the game plan. He can change a game. All the 10s can change a game, apart from Owen Farrell. But
well, it depends. You can get a yellow card.
Yeah, he can change a game by making it even more boring. But I think for me, it's a 10 is. We always talk about the link players 8, 9, and 10. Those are the three players that are the sort of the conduit of where the game comes from. And I think 10. You look at the greats that are out there. They move the players around the park to suit the game plan. And I think the worry, I understand John's worry about, if we start saying, right, well, Blair Kinghorn is going to play all these different positions, does he don't know enough about the game plan to be able to say a 100 cap player that's outside him to say you need to? But then I actually think that Blair Kinghorn, over the next year or the next season, you're going to find him more and more just being Edinburgh's 10. So I think actually he'll probably find that he will be a 10 that can play fullback and can play wing, rather than being a fullback who can play 10 like a Hoggy. So I think that's looking at the makeup of the squad. I think that's where it's come from. And both Mike Blair and Tooney have worked on Blair Kinghorn and both said that Blair Kinghorn is going to be a fantastic 10. So, I think that's where we are. I don't think he's a great utility player, but I think he's actually been brought in as a backup 10 and can also play these other positions.
What's your
Pretty
take?
telling that Edinburgh signed 3 outside backs and no 10s in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Michael on YouTube said, Johnny says, flexibility, total rugby. Tony's been at the Johan Cruyff again.
I think the flexibility is important if we're still doing we're going to be the fastest team in the world,
Which we're not.
especially in the back line, because the way to be fast is to always have a distributor. So if that is Blair Kinghorn is played at 15 and he comes in as a second distributor, if Finn runs a phase and then we've got somebody else who's ready to take another one. But if we're not doing that, I think John's probably right that actually it would be nice to know who plays in what position.
I think the point I was going to make with regards to, so think about the great success story of Scottish rugby in the last couple of years is Chris Harris, right? If Chris Harris was consistently getting shunted to wing or 12, he would not have been a British and Irish Lion. He would not be this. He would not be nailed down in that 13 shirt. There is no way he would have been able to get that consistency of performance and really build in the shirt.
But I suppose the versatility is it's to plug a gap where it's needed, isn't it? It's not. We're not. So it's great to have that. You need it from the bench. I think you look at the first choice players in every position, they're nailed on at their positions. And I would agree with Craig. I think the Blair Kinghorn's a 10 now. He's a 10 who can play 15. I think that's the way that Edinburgh seems to view him. I think it's the way that he's been viewed. Although everyone's naming him as in the back three, I think that's, you look at the Scotland squad and that, he's named as a fly half. He's a fly half, really. They haven't categorised him like that, but
there aren't any other fly halves. So.
No, exactly. So he must be the 10. If that squad announcement had come out as by position, Blair Kinghorn would have been listed under fly half. So I think you're right, John. You shouldn't lose your best players at the cost of versatility, but at the same time, you could say your best players all have that versatility. The best players in the world have that versatility. Finn Russell's got the versatility; he can play 12. So yes, I think you're absolutely right. You want your best players playing in the best positions that suit the system, and that shouldn't be at the cost. But I don't think, and we'll probably talk about the forwards in a minute. Aside from one player, I don't think anybody has been cut at the expense of, well, this guy's more versatile. Although they might be a lesser player.
Been left out.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying. We're going to come on to that, Johnny. I did.
I'm so angry about it. I can't wait to get
I agree to a certain extent. I think there is an argument for Townsend's clearly thinking World Cup, and he's clearly thinking 33 limit, and that's fine. That's fine. And do you know what? Six Nations battering. My concern is that. So think about Glasgow at the weekend. One substitution moved 5 people in the backs. So with versatility can sometimes come absolute stupidity.
I see. With great versatility comes great responsibility.
With great versatility comes great ridiculousness sometimes. So, yes, Kinghorn's a 10 who can play elsewhere now, and that's fine, right? Let's agree that. Let's park that. That's cool. I just don't really think we need to be getting into a situation where, right, so think we're winning against England at 70 minutes. Do you blink Blair Kinghorn? Does he come on at 10 and you move Russell to 12? And let's say you've got Redpath on at 12, so you move him to 13. And then we move Harris to the wing. And, it can get
But
stupid.
that would be that. I don't see Gregor Townsend doing that. I don't think he would. Unless he had to. I think it's.
So then you're losing
a massive coaching.
Bench.
It's a massive coaching error from Glasgow at the weekend to make one change that shifts that many players. You would do is you'd take, realistically in that situation, you're taking Redpath off, putting Kinghorn on and shifting Finn to 12 as a sub, as one sub. You're not, unless you've got an injury, you're not then shifting Harris or shifting other people around them. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen because it's Gregor Townsend, but that's fairly.
So what you're saying is it's Danny Wilson's fault?
Yeah, it's Danny Wilson. What I would say, though, which is interesting, is with Stuart Hogg, who's the captain. Now, there was a bit of a to-do on Instagram. It has to be said with former internationals and Stuart Hogg, and Stuart Hogg obviously feels that he has been slighted by Glasgow fans when he came up to Glasgow the other week and was somehow abused. And I think I'd be interested to see how that sits as Scotland captain going into the camp. And I do still worry and wonder that we were talking about 15 coming in as second distributor. When Scotland play well, Hogg comes in at second distributor and he actually passes the ball. When Scotland are on the back foot, Stuart Hogg runs into traffic consistently and gets isolated and gets turned over. So I don't know. I still have my doubts about Stuart Hogg as captain, Johnny, and I know you're in the fullback club. But
especially with this week, and like I know we talked about this yesterday, and I don't have a problem with him celebrating. Like Exeter's his team. When he scores, I don't have a problem with him celebrating. Him being basically in the stand when O'Flaherty scored, I was a bit like, we've maybe taken that a little bit too far. He's obviously a man who wants the rumours about him coming back to Glasgow to go away, and that's why he was celebrating so much. That's like,
but at what cost?
And I think exactly like you said as well. My main bugbear with Stuart Hogg, particularly over the last year to 18 months or so, is that, in fact, it's basically since Duhan became Scots qualified, is that Hoggy will take it as a second distributor, and then he will run into traffic. And I'm like, look, 6 feet that way. Look at you. Look at Duhan van der Merwe. Who do you think should be the one who's taking it into contact? I'll give you a hint. It's not you.
Yeah. Shall we talk about the forward? We've talked a lot about backs, Craig. I feel like we're neglecting the forwards.
I think there's only really, apart from the housewife's favourite being left at home, Dave Cherry isn't in there. I think there's only really one major talking point, really, and that is the real Slim Shady not being part of the squad, which is an odd one, because unless they're trying to develop. Now, I don't know whether it's Javan or Yavan, but Yavan Sebastian.
I thought it was Javan, but I may be wrong with that.
Javan, is it? Maybe, okay. Unless they're trying to develop him, because he's a younger player, I don't see... Because Kebble can cover both sides. And so, if we're talking about Blair Kinghorn being able to cover three positions, you want your prop to you want a prop that can sit on the bench that will cover both sides.
To interject, Sebastian is 27. He is not a younger player.
Okay then, right.
No, he's just not been good enough yet.
He's a young.
He just couldn't get a game for air. That's where we're at.
It's a really questionable one, because and I'll cross myself and Edinburgh fans. I'm really sorry to say this, but the one I didn't expect to be there was WP Nell.
Yeah.
Because Nell in the loose over the last few months has looked, he's scrummaging's on point. He's absolutely fabulous scrummager. And I guess that's why he's there. But in the loose, he's looking tired now. And so, if we were going to bring on, it's an interesting one.
Do you think he's there to be a coach on the field in training camp, the same way that Rob Harley was there in autumn?
That's a possible shout.
Yeah, and that might be why he's bringing on Sebastian. That's maybe why he's there to coach him. I honestly think you'll probably see him on the bench for the England game, because he'll be coming on to destroy the England front row.
I hope so, because the idea of bringing on Sebastian off the bench against England just be the absolute heebie-jeebies.
He didn't do badly in the autumn, though.
He wasn't bad, and that's. And you've also got to think of, and his basic scrummaging was good, and for what we saw of him, he looked fine. I've not seen a lot of him in Scarlets. I've not really watched a lot of his.
He played the second half against Japan. He played the second half against Japan, who are, let's face it, not renowned as the Georgia of world rugby when it comes to scrummaging.
He came on against us. Did he not come on against South Africa?
He only played against Japan. Second half against Japan. So to base this guy's international credentials scrummaging against one of the historically weaker teams in World Rugby at scrummaging, it's, you know what, like,
Well,
the coaches get paid for this. They've seen enough to think that he's got a
There
prospect.
are Scarlets fans who are by equal parts understand why Scotland have called him up, but are also equally baffled as to why they've done it as well. So it's not. I don't think Wales fans aren't sat there laughing about the fact we've called him up. There's a bit of an in joke about it, but I think that there is an understanding there that he's okay. He's fine. He might be able to do a job for us. I don't think anybody's going to suggest that he's going to be our starting front row. I certainly hope we don't get to that point. But I wonder with Kebble, though, Johnny, whether it's the same kind of, it's the Hastings thing. It's look, we can afford to do without you for at least the first game. And this, there's something that Townsend wants him to do that he's not doing, and just saying, look, it's an opportunity to say to him, you need to go and work on it because I can bring other guys in.
Yeah, it might, and to be honest, that's the only thing that kind of makes sense. Because I think Scotland are kind of in a bit of a place now, which we haven't been for a little while, where I think there's a bit of a drop-off after our starting front row.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Kebble's kind of in the gap between our starting front row and where the rest of the guys who are currently in the squad are. So it strikes me as a really weird one for him not to be in there, so that it must be that Tooney's kind of said to him, like, go and get better at this, and if you get better at that, then we'll need you in the squad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you see that you've got Sutherland there. You've got two Lions props there. Okay, Zander didn't do a lot on the Lions tour, but you've got two Lions props there who you would think would start, but with Schumann on the bench. So and probably WP Nell on the bench. So because WP will give you've got your two dedicated tight heads, and you've got your two dedicated loose heads, and maybe that's what they're looking for. Maybe Ollie Kebble was a master. It was a ability. What did they say? It's a able to do both, but jack of all trades, master of none. And Ollie Kebble was good in the open, but I wasn't fully convinced of him as a prop, but he did a good job. So he did.
I still think though that, right. So from a Glasgow perspective, we're looking at Kebble has over the last wee while probably been so Jamie Batty's been starting a lot more than Kebble, which again, so a lot of Glasgow fans comment on this and say it's actually tactical, that we're throwing Batty in, and it's almost like, see how you go, son. If you get parity at scrum, great, cool, we'll go with it. If you get absolutely hidden, then half time we'll get Kebble on and we'll stabilise it and we'll go from there. And that seemed to have worked a wee bit. This weekend was different, so let's we'll not talk about that. But I think like Townsend talked in his press conference about rewarding form, and I think there is an element of Batty has surpassed Kebble in the view of Danny Wilson in the last wee while, so you have to reward that. Whether Kebble is a better loosehead than Batty, I think that's unquestionable. Actually, I think he's far better, but there is an element of we need to give people who have been playing better a wee bit of a reward for that.
Having said that, Scarlets lost 45-10 at Bordeaux this weekend, so yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a puzzle as to why he's not in there. But I think there are reasons. I think we can speculate about them, but we'll time will tell. I think I agree with Nell
on the Patreon. Shall we speculate?
We'll speculate more on the Patreon. I think the only thing I'd say is, I think with Nell, I agree with Craig. I think he's got it in him to give a good final come on and do a job at scrum with 20 minutes to go, and that's what he's there for. And I think the Six Nations is different from the autumn because I think realistically should be expecting to give a good account of ourselves this time round. I'm going to hold myself back from saying going too far, but I think if it's an all or nothing tournament that we're setting out to give a good account of ourselves, then playing a 35-year-old prop who can do a job for you better than a younger prop isn't a bad call. It's not developing anybody, but at the same time, this isn't the time for developing people, I guess, Johnny.
Yeah, in the last 15 minutes of the Calcutta Cup, how much are you expecting your tight head to get around the field anyway?
Yeah.
So if WP can come on and Mueller a few scrums, his job's basically done.
Scrum
There'll be other
penalties is
boys
what
that
he's
come
there
on.
for.
Yeah, there'll be other boys that come on that are going to do the carrying and do the hard yards in the last 15 minutes. I don't think that if WP is in the squad for that game, that we're expecting him to make 10 or 15 carries. I think we're expecting him to win a couple of scrum penalties and push them backwards.
I personally don't
Which he
think
can do, and he's probably the best
anyone-
at it.
No one looked at that Scotland squad today and said, WP now, oh, that's a shame. I can't believe he's there.
No, I totally agree.
He's there for a reason. So,
Yeah.
Anything else for stand out from anybody? And the one again, Fraser Brown's not in there, but you look at the three hookers they've chosen, and they're all on form, and I don't know that there's nothing else. I think good to see Johnny Gray back, but there wasn't really any major apart from Andy Christie. There hasn't really been any major surprises in the forward.
We've got 4 second rows plus a couple of utility 4-6s if you count Skinner and that. So that's probably about right. Cummings and Gray would probably start. Gilchrist's there again. Cool. I mean,
Sykes has dropped out. Sykes has dropped out, but again, it's not that he was only in, I think, because it was the autumn test, and
I would say Hodgson's probably of those that pair. Hodgson's the one who's just slightly ahead from a Scotland perspective. So, no issues. The back row looks pretty dynamite. Bradbury's back. Should we talk about Bradbury? Let's talk about Bradbury.
Yeah, well, I think the number eight by the battle for 8, let's be honest, putting everything aside, the battle for number 8 is going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
I think it's, for me, on form, it's Bradbury's to lose.
Yeah.
But we don't know we don't know what, we haven't got an insight into camp. We don't know what's happening. But I think Bradbury is it's his shot to have based on form. And we've said before in the podcast, when Scotland have played well, Magnus Bradbury's had good games. You look at that draw against England, Magnus Bradbury was playing 8. Scotland had a great game.
The thing I'm going to say
that
he did. Do you know what? I'm saying it. Rory Darge, Jamie Ritchie, Magnus Bradbury is currently our best on form back row.
It is,
yeah.
Soz, Mullet.
Yeah. The only thing
he's suffering from the Lions. Since he came back from the Lions, he's not.
Yeah.
No,
I'm thoroughly unimpressed with people not talking about why is Jack Dempsey not there.
He's got another 6 months yet.
Yeah. The Dempsey lovers are well aware that he qualifies in the summer, mate. Don't you worry.
I've got it marked on my calendar.
Yeah.
The only
parts around it and everything.
The only thing, this happened to Mish before, where he lost a bit of form and then he got injured. And do you remember it was that Wales game he came back into?
Yeah.
And basically in one half of rugby, he managed to get to the top of the players beaten charts.
Yeah, I think Wales had, it was something like 12 broken tackles all tournament, and 7 of them were mesh in 25 minutes.
Yeah. And that's, and I think,
I honestly, I'd like to see Darge getting his cap. I'd like to see how he's going to perform on the international stage. You might find, I think there's just been a comment as well from, I don't know how to say his name, Mosh 10 or whatever, has said that he doesn't think that would Darge go ahead of Watson against England. And you'll probably find that Watson will start against England.
I can see it both. I can see it both ways. I can see, sticking Hamish Watson on, given he's a bit of loss of form, and he'd be up against Tom Curry with a point to prove. You could get a reaction from Hamish Watson. We could see him back on form. Having said that, it's not. We all looked on in horror when Gregor Townsend named Cameron Redpath at 12 against England in the Calcutta Cup, and thought, what the hell is he doing? And Scotland won for away to England for the first time in 30 odd years. So
in a game that was otherwise pretty miserable at the weekend, Rory Darge made Sam Simmons' life an absolute nightmare.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Cammy. The big. It's interesting because obviously you quite often see these players and you think, well, they're nailed on for that position, or they're this or that. These guys are going on, like Rory Darge is going into the Scotland camp believing that he could be the starting 7 for Scotland on form. The Scotland coaches will know that. And there will be no doubt. Like if Mish, and it's great for someone like Hamish Watson, who probably hasn't had, let's be honest, he hasn't had much competition over the last 4 or 5 years on a Scotland shirt. It's amazing for him to then have to raise his level at not the last gasps of his career, but he's further on in his career, and to have that challenge to have to raise your game again is brilliant.
I think that's one thing Gregor Townsend has done, and sometimes utterly terrifyingly done, and it hasn't always come off. But I think the fact that he will give completely untested players in at the deep end
at the biggest
to
stage.
see what happens, does put a rocket up other the incumbents players. I don't think you get that with England, for example. England's there's a lot of players in England probably thinking, my place is pretty secure in England. I'm going to have to, Billy Vunipola had to do a lot to lose his place in the, he's had to put on a lot of weight and get pretty bad before Eddie Jones has finally dropped him. Do you know what I mean? I think that's one of the positive things in this is that, every position is kind of, there's some I think we know more than others, but most positions are up for grabs.
Yeah.
That's it for the squad for the moment. We'll come back to it as the Six Nations goes on. Before we go, Johnny, you've been collating the results from Doddy Aid.
Yes, shall we do it?
We'll do it. So
let's not.
For people that might have just come to the pod today, Doddy Aid, it's Doddy Gump. So everyone's just trying to do as many miles, walking, cycling, skiing, running, whatever, riding on a horse apparently. Not driving in your car, which is shocking. We'll get.
I was gutted by that. That's ridiculous. I'd be.
I can see how quickly he's changed his tune about skiing, by the way. Because skiing was a no-no last week until someone from the south came on and said, "I've been skiing."
Listen. People from the borders need to get to work, and sometimes the weather's inclement, Johnny.
Riding a horse is the OG version of driving a car, so driving a car should be fine.
Yeah. Anyway, so Doddy Gump, you can still sign up to it. It's just doing as many miles as you can for Doddy. Sign up, you have to pay £20. You get a lovely snood depending on the district you sign up to. So we've set up our own league within that. And at the minute, Ian McGill absolutely racing away with 400 miles done, which is just utterly phenomenal. But when we
nobody likes a show off the way.
Yeah,
when we break it down,
nobody likes a show off.
I was going to say, actually, and if anyone wants to try and take that crown from me and step it up, I'm willing to put up for grabs an official Scottish Rugby podcast mug for the person that does the most miles in our league. So there's that. So
are you saying the person who does the most miles, but not Ian?
No, it could be Ian. Ian could win.
Right,
Ian
okay.
could win the. Ian
it
could
sounded
win the
like
mug.
you were challenging people to beat him, but you weren't going to reward Ian.
No, Ian could. You could if you want a mug, you're gonna have to beat Ian. So he's got a lot of second and third. I've got a lot of catching up to do. I've had a couple of people sign up to the south to join me because we were doing quite badly. Shout out to Ross Galloway who said he's been doing his miles in the queue for Greg's. That's exactly the kind of contribution I'd expect from people from the south of Scotland. Johnny, how do things stand?
Okay, so we're creeping up. We're now at about 27 of about 45 in our league, so we're up to about 2/3. I'm still waiting for a few people to tell me, but at the moment, Barbarians are still sadly winning. Steph from Rock and Roll, who is our de facto Barbarians captain, is miles behind the rest of his team, but they've got 867.5 miles. North of Midlands, we're next, 633.9 miles. A big push for Craig this week. So Craig's up at 553.9 for Edinburgh. The South are up to 267 for you, Cammy.
Right.
And right down at the bottom, 116.5. So a clear 150 miles behind any other district. Mr. Anderson in the Glasgow district.
Yes. However,
you've done 50%. You've done over 50% of those miles on your own.
Absolutely busting myself here, guys.
To be fair, of the captains of the districts, John is the only one of us who's leading his district, and he is also top of our group.
It would not be hard to be leading my district right now. And yes, I am top of the group. So that's what's actually important here, guys. I love this, though. Ian McGilp's actual message to say, I'm happy to forgo the mug to whoever's second if we can call it the McGilp Cup. That is a beautiful idea.
Yeah, we'll have to do it every year we'll have the McGilp Cup every year.
You've got to send it to the winner, but you're not allowed to wash it.
Yeah, I was going to say, eventually it comes to you and it's a coffee-stained mug.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So there you go. So if you're on Doddy and you're not signed up to Ollie, get involved. And if you contact Johnny through his DMs on Twitter. So what's your Twitter again, Johnny, for everyone?
It is Johnny Forms, JONNY Forms. It's me on Twitter.
You can find
so
Johnny.
Let me know what district you are.
Yeah, if you can't find Johnny, you send me a message on Patreon if you're Patreon or at Scott Rugby Pod. I'll pass it on to Johnny and he can collate it. But yeah, we're getting towards the end of the month now, so it's time for everyone to step up. I've no intention of doing that.
Time for everyone who's not me to step up.
There's loads of people riding horse riding is a big thing in the borders. Like, if you ride horses in the border, sign up to Doddy Gum, get me some miles.
I'm still not half of this horse riding.
This is ridiculous. Unless you sign the horse up as a separate account and pay your 20 quid for the horse.
All I'm saying is if we were doing this during common riding season, right, and I could sign up hundreds of riders to this, we'd be away. Right?
There's a joke about Glasgow here that I'm not going to near.
Anyway, okay. Well, on that note, that's it for us for this week for the main podcast. If you're a Patreon listener, and you can subscribe to Patreon, patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast, you get the bonus weekly episode where we do Hands in the Ruck, and we kind of go back over some of the other points that we've talked about in the podcast in a bit more detail. We're going to have a bit of a chat about the European games as well this week as well. So if you are watching live, you can hang around for us and keep watching if you're on the Patreon. Otherwise, for this week, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from John, Johnny, and Craig.
Goodbye.
Bye.